Farage has accused Wes Streeting of attempting to conceal the reality of the grooming gang scandal. This is after the Health Secretary claimed that irresponsible and coarse public discourse could lead to more atrocities against Muslims if entire communities were vilified. To discuss this further, I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Senior Solicitor at Central Chambers Law, Mateb Aziz. Mateb, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Really appreciate your time, because many of our viewers are saying over the grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them, scandal, why aren't more Muslims talking out about this issue? Why do you think that is?
Well, firstly, thank you, Dawn, for having me on your show. Now, the thing is, I must stress that the findings of the J report, which spanned over 8 years, identified that the most number of referrals were actually came from schools, secondly from children's homes, and thirdly from the church. Now, I just want to establish that first, but in terms of the Muslim community, every Muslim is just as horrified and appalled at what has happened and the way that these victims have been, damaged for life. And I can assure you that if there was anything more possible to do to prevent these abuses from happening, every Muslim would in fact do that. It's just that at the moment, as you know, the government hasn't actually implemented or taken action on the 20 recommendations of the J report.
Now, obviously, the 2022 report covered a wide range of our child sex abuse situation, including the church and sports clubs, etc., etc. So what we're talking about today is the grooming gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them, Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, all of those places. So Wes Streeting has said that talking about this situation, we have to be very careful of the language because Muslims will feel vilified by this. And he raised the spectre of the horrific case in Christchurch where a mosque was attacked. What do you make of what he had to say?
Well, Wes Streeting is actually correct in some ways, because what happens is that when you vilify a whole community in this way, there will be repercussions and there will be attacks and there will be harm done. It always happens, and for instance, when Donald Trump labelled COVID as the Chinese virus, there was a whole backlash against Chinese people. In other examples, when we had the AIDS virus, there was a backlash against African people. So it's something which can happen and will happen, and he was quite right to, in fact, call that out.
Do you think, I mean, the government seems to be backing away from a legal definition of Islamophobia. What is Islamophobia? Does it actually exist, and do we need a legal definition of it?
Well, Islamophobia as anti-Semitism is a very important issue, and it does need to be defined. Anti-Semitism is defined, so therefore Islamophobia should be defined, so that people know when they're sending out tweets or messages, so they know that they don't actually breach that definition.
Do you think that, I mean, we have laws against governing sort of like racism against various groups. So do you think, though, by legalising an Islamophobic description, it might silence people even more from talking out about situations like the grooming gangs?
Well, in fact, there has been a gap. There has been, in fact, a gap in terms of discrimination, because the Equality Act, in fact, although it's very good on racism, wasn't so good on religious racism. Oh, sorry, religious discrimination. And I believe it is something which is necessary, because a lot of it could be any religion. A lot of people of any religion do find that they need added protection, and Muslims, in fact, no less.
OK. And why do you think the government aren't keen on a national inquiry on the grooming gangs? Is it because 80% of Muslims do vote Labour? Well, they did before the Gaza situation. Do you think they are worried about losing votes?
Personally, I don't think so, because you have to remember that the J report spanned 8 years and has cost nearly £190 million. And a lot of these recommendations are actually very, very good, but they have yet to be implemented. So I think if you want to, yes, I'd say a national inquiry is better than a local inquiry. Yes, I would say that. But I would say that it's probably premature, because we have to actually implement and actually look at those recommendations and actually put them into place.
But to be fair, the original inquiry, the J report, it wasn't specific about the grooming gangs, and many of the victims of that themselves want a national inquiry. They don't want... I mean, Oldham have said, look, please help us out here. We don't want to hold we don't want to hold our own local inquiry. And we know, people connected to the council in Oldham have been connected to the gangs as well. So if the victims want it and the councils involved want it, why shouldn't there be one?
As I said, I think there should be one, but I think it's a bit premature, because you have to understand that the purpose of that report was to find the failings in the institutions which allowed these things to happen and didn't do anything about it. So to have another inquiry when you haven't actually sorted that out, I believe is premature. Okay. And in fact, most of the victims are saying what they're saying is because nothing has been done yet about that original J report.
This is true. No, neither party have acted on it. Just quickly and finally, because lots of people are asking this question, so I have to ask you, does Islam have a problem with women?
Absolutely not. And I gave the example of the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, praise be upon him. She was a well-to-do, successful businesswoman, carrying out her business all those years ago. And in fact, Islam says that Islam places the mother as the highest person you must give respect to. And I could give you many examples. Absolutely, there is absolutely no problem with women at all. And this is unfortunately a misconception.
OK, thank you very much for joining us. That's Solicitor at Central Chambers Law, Mahtab Aziz. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr Aziz. Now, OK, let's see what my panel make of this. I have the wonderful Mike Parry and Jonathan Schneider with me. I'm going to come to you, James Schneider. Sorry, James Schneider. I'm going to come to you first, Mike, on this one. What do you make of what you've just heard?
Well, I just can't get it. I'm very disappointed in West Streeting for pulling back on this and suggesting that, if you get too excited and if you start focusing on the most horrific crime I can remember in my lifetime as a journalist, which is nearly 50 years, believe it or not, I can't remember a mass crime like this. Old men raping and bodily damaging young white girls because they were young and white. I just can't get it. I mean, West Streeting to suddenly say, it could end up in a situation like New Zealand where a man attacked 2 mosques and shot a load of Muslim people. That guy was a one-off nutter, right? So to try and drag that out of the history books and say it could happen here, I'm very, very disappointed. The problem is Labour are intent on that you shouldn't mention the M-word, Muslim, you shouldn't mention the P-word, Pakistan, because they know, and I think this is the greatest accusation that can be made against Labour. You pointed out the statistic that 80% of Muslims vote Labour, or did before Gaza, right? So I'm using your own figures here. But what I'm saying is we know they fear losing Muslim constituencies because in the last general election, they lost 4 to independents who went on a pro-Palestinian lobby, OK? And including Jonathan Ashworth in Leicester East.
And West Streeting was one of those.
And West Streeting. So what I'm saying is they are very, very frightened of upsetting Muslim communities. I think on this show 2 or 3 days ago, not this show, but on this station, Simon Danzuk, right, the former Labour MP, he actually said that on one occasion when it was being debated in the Commons, a senior Labour official came to him just before he entered the chamber and said, don't mention ethnicity, whatever you do, Simon. They are terrified of raising the real issue. And that, to me, is an horrendous, shocking betrayal of these young girls who've been horrendously attacked and raped.
James.
So I think we should be focused on protecting kids and on getting the fullest amount of justice possible for all of the victims and not advancing the careers of particular politicians. And I think a really long list of them have behaved quite shamefully over the last week and are pushing basically themselves and their
Give me
own...
an example. Which one's? Name one that you think has behaved appallingly.
Oh, well, I've got quite a long list. I think...
Give me a couple.
OK, I think Kemi Badenoch, for example, who was the children's minister, who was then the women's minister, who didn't call for an inquiry or really raise this issue at all, then trying to pretend that she's at the front of it. I think that's pretty shameful. I think the Home Secretary, at the time where the J inquiry landed on the desk, that has a whole set of recommendations, which was Suella Braverman coming out and saying some nonsense about deporting foreign criminals, which you can do anyway if you're the Home Secretary. I think both governments who haven't brought forward any of the recommendations, as far as I can see, from that inquiry, which was started in 2022, landed on the Home Secretary's desk in the summer of 2023. Lots of very good things in that, like mandatory reporting if someone tells somebody that they have been a victim of it. But
very little focus on this issue that we're talking about.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Right. Within that report, there are lots of things that would very much help with this issue. The key one for me is setting up a child protection agency. And I think the child protection agency, which should have on it people like Jane Senior, whistleblower in the Rotherham case, and so on and so forth, people who know what they're talking about, not, because I have zero trust in them at all, the politicians who are currently trying to make hay for themselves. And to be honest, this...
You would include both Labour and Conservative politicians in that, would you? I mean, for example, Jess Phillips took 4 months to respond
which I think is so strange and tone deaf. Totally. I also think this Farage attack on Streeting again is not dealing with the issue at hand. I mean, firstly, what Wes Streeting said, Farage's claim is that conceals reality. Streeting hasn't said conceal reality. It's like the way in which this is spoken about, which is quite right. We saw only a few months ago when something was presented as being something it wasn't in Southport, what chain of events that set up.
We can't discuss the Southport case because it's still a live case, obviously.
Fine, but the racist violence, the attacks on mosques, all that stuff that happened. So, of course, the way in which you talk about things is important. But the most important thing that we should be talking about, which none of the politicians really seem to be doing so at all, is to talk about the solutions. When are these recommendations, which, like mandatory reporting, most important one, child protection agency, and a single statistical information so that we can actually see. So rather than, Mike might make one claim and I might make a counter claim about, for example, ethnic background, whatever it might be, the data is actually collected, so then we can know. But that's not what they're talking about. They're scoring political points.
But James, this whole story is taking on new oxygen because of an investigation by this very station, GB News. So you can't look back historically and say she didn't do that, he didn't do that. It's been reignited, and what we're looking for is a response from politicians on both sides of the House since it got reignited by the GB News investigation, which has blown the whole thing apart, and it's much worse than any of us ever thought. So what we want now is sensible politicians to say action this day, and Wes Streeting is trying to put the lid on that.
Look, I'm no fan of Wes Streeting. I don't really think it's fair to say he's trying to put the lid on it. But I agree with you. I haven't heard any of them say on either side, here are these lists of, very reasoned, well worked out from an expert who has also done a previous inquiry into Rochdale, who knows what she's talking about. These are the recommendations. We've had 18 months. None of this has become law. We haven't passed any statutory instruments or new legislation. Let's write a bill that does this and does this quickly. And then I think, because I don't want the MPs themselves setting up the inquiry, I don't know how they'll do it. I want the Child Protection Agency to do it.
Or on a judge, don't we? An independent judge.
And but with its mandate set by the Child Protection Agency, people whose only responsibility
it's the children.
is to children and victims of this stuff. Because regardless of who's done it and who it's done to, this stuff is absolutely vile, and that needs to be taken with a very high level of seriousness. Why do you think Labour are so
against an inquiry, even in their ability to get the British people to vote for them, in their ability to say to the British people, we cover big issues? They put the Battle of Orgreave into their election manifesto. The Battle of Orgreave was between coal miners and the NUM and the police 40 years ago. They said we're going to have an inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave. Nobody cares about the Battle of Orgreave.
Well, some people do care about the Battle of Orgreave.
Well,
Yeah,
very few compared to what's happening here.
But your point is it's not relevant to what we're talking about today. The one thing that worries me, I want to know what you think as well, is that we still have the councils involved in this who are saying that using the phrase Asian grooming gangs is racist. These are the councils who are actually involved in it still. So we're still not facing up to reality of what happened. Now, we give you a government spokesman, their statement on this. The Home Office issued the following. No child should ever suffer sexual abuse or exploitation, and it is paramount we do more to protect vulnerable children, which is why we are working at pace across government to drive forward real action. And in letters responding to Oldham Council, a Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, has said that she understands the strength of feeling and that a further inquiry into child sexual exploitation in Oldham should be undertaken. Phillips added that she was very sorry for the delay in responding to both of the executive's letters. But she said that she believed it is for Oldham Council alone to decide to commission an inquiry into child sexual exploitation locally rather than the government to intervene. What